The Blood Moon prayer hall was packed with two courts that had spent 10 years trying to kill each other. Torchlight climbed the stone pillars in long orange streaks, and the air smelled of crushed silver leaf and old incense, the scent the hall always wore on nights of great importance. Banners from both packs hung side by side along the walls. For the first time in a decade, faded Silvervale silver beside deep Draven crimson, several of them still bearing the scorch marks of a border skirmish, fought near a river crossing called Red Ford, a name the older soldiers in the hall still flinched to hear. Tonight, both packs meant to end a decade of war with a single marriage. 3 things had to happen before that war could truly be called over, and the difference between them mattered more than anyone in that hall wanted to admit. The civil writ had already been signed that afternoon, witnessed by both packs, and under the law of both nations, Arl Draven and Saren Vale were already, simply, married. The Sacred Luna Oath was something else entirely, an older and heavier rite that would bind Saren's own fate to the crown, for as long as she lived, granting her the authority of a Luna in exchange for a lifelong tie. Neither pack had ever asked her plainly whether she wanted. The Blood Moon Peace Bond was different again. The true treaty between the two nations, traditionally sealed through the royal couple, but legally its own instrument. The one thing that would actually end the war on the border. Only the civil writ was finished. The other 2 remained, and everyone standing in that hall understood exactly how much still hung on them. Saren Vale walked into the hall in a pale silver gown, her hand resting lightly on Elder Naren's arm, her eyes open, calm, and seeing nothing at all. She walked the way she always did, counting her steps, listening for the shift of air near the pillars, letting the warmth of distant torches guide her more than any eyes ever could. The court did not lower its voice for her. She cannot even see the throne she is supposed to share, someone whispered from the gallery. A blind Luna for a wounded kingdom, said another, not quietly enough. Arl Draven heard every word of it. He did not laugh, but he did not stop it either. That silence was the first mistake he made that night, though he would not understand it as one for a while yet. High Priest Varric Thorn began the ritual, his voice smooth and practiced, the voice of a man who had said these exact words 100 times before, and never once doubted them. The Black Moon crown rested on a silver cushion before the altar, its bloodstone dark and dull beneath the candlelight, worn from generations of hands that had come before. Arl led Saren toward it, his own hand steady, though something in his chest had gone tight the moment they entered the hall. She reached out and touched the bloodstone. She recoiled instantly, as though the stone itself had burned her fingers. The bloodstone darkened for one long breath, black as a closed eye. The moon flame on the altar tilted sharply away from its stand, bending like it was trying to lean out of the room entirely. In his own mind, behind his own eyes, Orel heard his father's voice, as sharp as drawn silver. Do not let her name what she cannot see. Saren turned her face toward the sound of his breathing, though she could not see him at all. Your throne is being worn by a dead man, she said. The hall erupted into noise, gasps and furious whispers climbing the stone walls at once. Orel's voice went cold. Choose your next words carefully, bride. I already did, she answered, steady despite the volume around her. The dead hand on your crown has been choosing yours for years. Varric moved quickly to seize control of the room, declaring loudly that Silvervale had clearly smuggled a curse into the wedding itself, an insult no Draven court could accept. Lady Morel Ashen laughed from the gallery, her voice carrying easily over the murmuring crowd, saying the blind bride could apparently see ghosts now of all the impossible things. Orel demanded proof, his jaw tight, unwilling to let the moment slip entirely out of his control. Saren answered him plainly, without flinching from the accusation in his tone. She could not see faces, not his, not anyone's. She could not read ordinary script, not a single letter of it. Her gift had never given back what her blindness had taken from her. What it gave her instead was one narrow sense the sighted did not have. She could feel the weight and shape of a promise, once it had been sworn into an object, a body, or a right, and she could feel whether that promise had been bent away from what it was meant to protect. She could not read minds. She could not see memories that had never been tied to an oath. She reached for Elder Naren's oath ring and felt something coiled inside it, hidden, older than it should have been, enough to make Naren's face go pale in front of the entire court. She touched the broken treaty seal resting on the altar table and said it had been severed by a war oath, not by any failure of the treaty's ink or wax, and beneath her fingers she felt the faint cold trace of blood that had once been spilled near a river crossing. Priestess Illyra stepped forward from the edge of the hall, visibly afraid of Varric standing so close, but she spoke anyway, her voice trembling only slightly. She said the forbidden prayer records made clear mention of cursed seers, people who lost their ordinary sight, and gained, in its place, the narrow ability to feel a sworn oath and nothing more. She had kept a copy of certain records herself, quietly, for years, ever since a fellow novice who had once questioned Varric's prayers had simply stopped being seen in the hall. I kept copying the prayer. Varric kept erasing, she said. I was too afraid to speak alone. I was waiting for someone the crown itself could not silence. Seren turned toward the sound of Aurel's breath, her voice quieter now, meant only for him though the whole hall could hear it. I cannot see your crown, my king, she said. That is why I noticed what it was doing to you. Aurel still doubted her. Some part of him, unwilling to believe a marriage built for peace, could already be tangled in something so old and so wrong. But he could no longer call her a liar, not in front of a hall that had just watched an elder envoy go pale at her touch. He studied her for a long moment. The way a man studies a locked door he suspects hides something he does not want to find. Around them, the court had split into two currents of whispering. Some certain Seren was exactly what Varric claimed. Others quietly wondering, for the first time, whether their king's crown had always felt heavier than a crown should. Seren asked to see the death prayer record of Orlan Draven, the king before Aurel, the very king who had raised him and shaped the crown he now wore. Varric objected immediately, calling the request an insult to a grieving crown and a grieving son. Aurel overruled him anyway, and ordered the royal archive opened before the court, ignoring the murmurs that followed him as he sent for the keys himself. The official record stated that Orlan had died on the battlefield, surrounded by his soldiers, a king's death, clean and simple and honorable, the same account every child in Dravenmoor had grown up hearing. But Illyra's duplicate prayer record told an entirely different story, one she had copied herself before the original was ever damaged, and had a second novice witness at the time, her name still recorded in the margin. It showed Orlan carried back into the Blood Moon prayer hall on the very night he died, not left where he had fallen among his men. One line on the original page had since been scraped away completely, the parchment gone thin and pale where the ink used to sit, the edges of the scrape still visible under torchlight. Seren could not read the missing words with her sight, but she could feel the oath bent there, twisted hard toward war and toward attachment, refusing even now to let go of what it held. Illyra used her duplicate copy to restore what the scraped line had once said aloud for the court. The king bound his last breath to the crown, it read. The old crown forging him, older than either of them, stated plainly that a spirit could only linger 3 nights to pass along its oath before it was required to leave the crown entirely. Your father did not leave you a crown, Seren said. He left himself inside it. Aurel's anger flared, hot and sudden, because if she was right, his father had not simply died all those years ago. He was still there, quietly, patiently, pressing on his own son's choices, and no one in the kingdom had ever noticed. Seren asked to compare the peace negotiation records against the war decrees signed throughout Aurel's reign. Aurel did not want to allow it, but he did, because refusing now would look far worse than permitting it. A royal clerk brought forward 2 stacks of parchment, one thin and hopeful, the other thick and stained with years of conflict, and laid them side by side on the altar table for the entire court to see. The records told their own uncomfortable story. When Auril had not been wearing the crown, he had once agreed to lower Silvervale's war tribute, without much resistance at all. A decision several nobles in the hall still remembered arguing against at the time. When he wore the crown during negotiations, he had suddenly demanded a blood oath instead, with no clear reasoning offered to his own advisors, several of whom now exchanged uneasy glances across the hall. Several of the war decrees used exact phrasing that had once belonged to Orlan, phrases Auril did not remember choosing himself, phrases an old scribe in the corner recognized instantly and refused to meet anyone's eyes over. More than one order to attack had been signed within hours of what the court quietly called a crown vigil, a tradition no one had ever questioned until this very night. The crown, Saren explained, could not plant a desire that was never there. It could only press harder on fear and grief Auril already carried, making the familiar, angrier choice feel like the only choice available. He had still been free, especially with the crown set aside, and he had chosen, again and again, to put it back on whenever the moment felt uncertain. "When did your father last speak to you?" Saren asked. "In dreams," Auril said. "No," she said gently. "Through silver, through the crown itself, wearing your own doubt as an opening." He heard, in his own memory, a phrase his father used to say, often late at night, when Auril was still young enough to believe every word of it. "Peace is a chain worn by weak sons." Saren repeated the exact phrase back to him, word for word, though he had never spoken it to anyone in his entire life. She explained, before he could ask, that she had not read his memory. The words had been pressed into the crown itself so many times over the years that they had left a groove, like a footpath worn into stone, and she had simply felt where that groove ran deepest. The hall went utterly silent. He began, slowly and painfully, to understand that the influence on him was real, and had been for a very long time. But Saren did not let him hide behind that truth. "A curse can tighten a choice," she said. "It cannot make accountability disappear." Auril's voice came out quiet, almost a confession. The voice pushed. My hand still signed. He reached for the crown a second time that night. Some part of him, still convinced that finishing the ritual would fix everything the conversation had just broken open, that duty alone could smooth over what truth had just uncovered. Saren placed her hand gently on his wrist, not to hold him back by force, only to anchor him to the moment, the way a person might steady someone standing too close to a ledge. This time, wide awake, with witnesses all around him, Auril heard his father's voice again, clear and cold, cutting through the noise of the hall like it belonged there more than he did. "Do not let the blind girl make you kneel." He let go of the crown. Varric struck at him immediately, aiming for shame instead of truth. "A king who blames the dead for his choices is not fit to rule," he said, loud enough for the whole gallery to hear. Saren turned toward the sound of his voice without hesitation. "And a priest who feeds the dead through a crown is not fit to bless a marriage," she answered. From that moment forward, the question in the hall was no longer whether Saren could truly see a curse. It was whether Auril could admit in front of both his people and hers that his own crown had been used to keep a war alive far longer than it needed to be. Varric struck again, harder this time, calling Saren a curse bride, sent deliberately by Silvervale to poison the Draven throne from within. The Draven court's anger surged at that accusation, rising towards something dangerous. The Silvervale envoys grew visibly afraid the entire treaty was about to collapse right there in front of them. Elder Naren was finally forced to admit a truth he had clearly been carrying alone for some time, his voice much smaller now than it had been at the start of the evening. Silvervale had long suspected the Draven crown was cursed. Whispered rumors passed carefully between a handful of trusted advisors over the last several years, never once spoken above a whisper until tonight. They had told Saren only that the marriage was for peace. They had never told her they suspected the crown itself, and they had never asked whether she was willing to walk into that hall as a hidden test rather than simply a bride. Auril looked toward her, something cold settling in his voice. "So you were sent as a weapon?" "Yes," she said simply. "By my pack, not by my will." She turned back toward where Naren stood. You sent me without asking if I wished to be used as a blade. Naren had no defense he could offer for that, and did not try to give one. At the border that same evening, both armies had been standing down only until moonset, on the understanding that the peace bond seal would be delivered to their commanders by then, a condition set weeks earlier by generals on both sides who trusted rituals more than they trusted each other. Outside the hall, a war horn sounded, low and urgent, cutting straight through the tension inside. A messenger burst through the heavy doors, breathless, his boots still muddy from the ride, reporting that a Draven border regiment had already abandoned their camp, convinced Silvervale meant to sabotage the wedding entirely. Silvervale scouts were already retaliating along that same border, neither side willing to be caught unprepared, and word was spreading through both camps, faster than either commander could contain it. The Moonflame had only minutes left before moonset, and everyone in that hall understood exactly what that deadline meant. If the peace bond seal did not reach the border commanders in time, the standing down order would lapse, and the skirmish outside would become a full war again before dawn broke. Put on the crown, Varric urged, his voice suddenly reasonable, almost gentle. Finish the rite. Save your people. It sounded entirely reasonable. That was exactly what made it so dangerous. Aurel stood before the Black Moon crown, the whole hall watching him in absolute silence, waiting to see what their king would choose. The only sound, the faint crackle of the moon flame struggling to stay upright. If he refused to wear it, the treaty might collapse entirely within the hour. The warhouses could call Silvervale traitors outright, and real bloodshed could begin along the border before morning arrived, a cost measured in lives he would never get back. If he put it on, Orlan might slip directly into the peace bond itself, binding Saren to a war oath disguised carefully as a wedding vow, turning peace into nothing more than a new name for the same old war, a cost measured in something far harder to undo. For one long, terrible moment, Aurel nearly convinced himself it would be fine. Just this once, just long enough to save what mattered most. The same bargain, he realized dimly, that his father must have told himself once too. If you sign peace with a war oath on your head, Saren said, you will not make peace. You will teach war to wear my name instead. The crown seemed to whisper then, in a voice unmistakably his father's, low and coaxing. Put me on, son. Aurel closed his eyes. Then slowly he set the crown back down on the altar. No, he said. It was the first time in his entire life that he had refused his father in front of the whole court. Saren said there was one path still open to them. An old rite half remembered from the oldest priesthood records. A stanza Illyra's duplicate had preserved incomplete. A fragment of the same crown hymn that named it only as the unbinding. Naren, pale but steady now, said Silvervale had kept half of that same rite in its own oldest records. A piece that spoke of witnesses and voluntary vows, though no one in his lifetime had ever needed to use it. Between the two halves, the shape of the rite finally became clear. No single person could perform it alone, no matter how strong their gift or their will. It required three things together, and all three had to happen in the same breath of moonlight, or the rite would fail entirely. A cursed seer to name the knot binding the crown, aloud, so the court itself could witness what had been hidden. A living king to refuse the death oath himself, freely, fully awake, with no one forcing the words from him, not even the woman standing beside him. And both pacts to sign a peace vow of their own free will, one that did not rest the entire weight of that peace on a single bride's shoulders, as the old treaty so quietly had. While the hall debated frantically around them, Varric slipped quietly toward the moon flame and tried to pour more oil into it, hoping no one would notice in the chaos of shouting nobles and frightened envoys. Illyra caught him in the very act, stepping directly into his path before he could tip the vial. The oil, she announced to the entire court, her voice shaking but clear, had been made from ash taken from Orlan's own grave, ground fine and mixed with sacred oils meant for something far more honest. Beneath the altar's itself, a hidden bone relic was uncovered when two guards pried up the loose stone. Illyra pointed to, kept there for years, quietly feeding the crown, long after any honest spirit should have moved on from this world. The dead keep kingdoms honest better than living brides, Varric shouted, no longer bothering to hide his conviction. And for one moment, he sounded less like a schemer than a man who had truly believed it since the day he first saw Red Ford burn. The dead keep wounds open, Saren answered calmly, when the living are too afraid to heal them. The moon flame flared violently upward, throwing shadows across every wall in the hall. Orlan's shape rose up behind the throne like a great crown wolf built from smoke and old, dried blood, taller than any living wolf had ever stood. He spoke of Red Ford, of the ceasefire broken there years ago, of Draven villagers slaughtered when peace had already failed them once before. He spoke of children who had died in the snow, that terrible winter, their names still remembered by the oldest soldiers in that very hall. He said that peace now would make every one of those deaths entirely meaningless. Auril nearly fell to his knees under the weight of it. Saren could not break the command for him. I can see the knot, she said, but only you can stop obeying it. Auril placed his hand on the bloodstone instead of the crown itself. I honor the dead, he said, his voice shaking but clear. I do not obey the dead. Orlan's voice struck one final time, cold and merciless. Then you make their graves meaningless. Their deaths do not become sacred, Auril answered, because you refuse to stop adding to them. A small crack split clean across the crown's surface. Saren read the knot aloud as it finally came apart. A dying breath, a war vow, stolen ash oil, a scraped prayer line, a crown memory forced into obedience for years, far longer than any law allowed. Alira smothered the last of the burning ash oil with her own sleeve. Naren stepped forward and publicly gave up any claim to decide the Luna Oath on Saren's behalf ever again, and pledged that Silvervale's council would formally review how she had been sent and would require full and informed consent from any envoy chosen in the future. Auril and Naren signed a new peace vow together before both courts, the ink still wet as it was read aloud. No peace shall depend upon one bride's submission, it read. No dead ruler shall bind the judgment of the living crown. No Luna Oath shall stand without freely given consent. This peace belongs to the living, Auril said, his voice carrying clearly to every corner of the hall. Not my fathers, not my crowns, chosen and signed by those of us still here to keep it. Saren touched the crown one final time gently, without fear this time. She felt the dead hand finally let go of what it had held for so long. The moon flame turned silver and steady, standing tall again on its altar. Orlan's shape faded slowly from the throne room until nothing remained but smoke and old candlelight. Varric was seized by the guards before he could reach the door. The old wedding ritual, the one built to bind her without her full and willing consent, was formally struck down there in front of everyone. That same night, the crown was sealed away in the deepest archive, and a rider left for the border before the moon flame had even finished settling, carrying the signed peace seal to both commanders before moonset passed. In the days that followed, the deeper work began. Auril voided the old sacred Luna Oath entirely. The civil marriage remained legally intact, but was placed under a council review period, its future no longer decided by ritual or by anyone's expectation but Saren's own. Because she had been sent into that marriage without full knowledge of what it truly asked of her, the review granted her, and her alone, the right to ratify the Luna Oath, delay it, or dissolve the marriage entirely, without the peace treaty falling apart alongside it. Auril could choose not to continue the marriage as well, but he could not compel her to stay in it, a distinction the council wrote into law before the week was out. Saren was recognized as Silvervale's peace envoy, and as a provisional member of the Draven Council for the length of the review period, with full voting rights on matters concerning the treaty and the crown. Supported by a reader, she trusted to speak every document aloud in full. At her insistence, the council also adopted new practice for its records, spoken aloud at every session and marked afterward with tactile seals, a small reform, she said, should outlast her own seat at that table entirely. The massacre, records from Orlan's reign, were reopened for full review by a council drawn from both packs. The war decrees, signed during past crown vigils, were examined one by one, and several were formally reversed. Varric's priesthood was placed under full audit, its ledgers and its prayers laid open at last, to eyes that had no reason to protect the crown's old comfort. War prisoners on both sides began to be exchanged within the same month. Families reunited, who had long since stopped hoping. Auril agreed to rule without wearing the crown for a full lunar cycle, bound instead by a living oath spoken freely before the council as witness. The court was not entirely at peace after all this, not yet. One warhouse walked out of the hall in protest before the night was through, and border tensions did not vanish overnight. But peace no longer depended on a blind bride staying silent to hold it all together. When the lunar cycle finally passed, Taurel still ruled without the crown, the archive seal on it unbroken. Saren had not yet decided whether to ratify the Luna Oath, and no one in either court pressed her to. She sat in council sessions as an equal, her reader's voice carrying the words she could not see, and for the first time in years, Dravenmore's ledgers were read the same way for everyone in the room. "You saw the dead man on my throne," Auril said quietly to her, once the hall had begun to empty. "No," Saren answered. "I saw the living king underneath him. There was no kiss between them that night. No mate claims spoken beneath the moon. Only the quiet, careful beginning of respect between two people who had finally chosen honesty over ceremony." By dawn, Dravenmore no longer whispered that the blind bride could not see the throne she was meant to share. It remembered her instead as the only one brave enough to name the dead king still sitting on it. Should Auril have risked the peace treaty by refusing the cursed crown, or should he have completed the rite first and dealt with the curse afterward?